I would say the Empathy Museum made me feel inspired. Like, I just really love the fact that, you know, they've taken the concept of empathy and made it something tangible.
I've listened to a few stories here. You know, it's just stories from all over the world.
You don't have to know them, but like listening to their lovely voices and their stories, it definitely links you. And it's just as important doing these stories as it is like fairy tales, like passing on sort of information.
You know, you need to think about the people who are literally standing next to you every day. You know, someone might have a bit of a face on, but maybe they're going through something.
If I can just take a moment and step back from how I feel and see it from how they feel, we can only really work together if we can see things from each other's point of views.
Anywhere where you have different communities rubbing alongside each other, finding the things that we have in common or the places we might start from together feels like something to pause and think over.
So even beyond this, you know, you don't have to kind of actually put somebody's shoes on to listen to them and hear their stories.
Kind of like listen to podcasts, watch documentaries and stuff that you wouldn't normally, search out perspectives that aren't necessarily from your own friendship group, just to challenge your opinions about things.
To make people more empathetic, I guess. I mean, they just need to take one listen to that and then problem solved.
Babies are 100% accepting and they don't judge. We know that babies love people regardless of how they behave. Their superpower is that they can make you love them. With the help of an instructor, children observe the most powerful relationship in the lifespan. The research calls it the attachment relationship between a parent and a baby. And the children spend time every month with that baby from the time the baby's 2 months old right to the end of school. And they study that baby. They learn about what the baby's feeling. The children fall in love with the baby and they learn a lot about love from the baby and they learn about all their feelings. And then they learn how to have those same feelings for other people. Children are the citizens, the parents, and the leaders of tomorrow. And if we want them to grow up, to be healthy, to be mentally well, to be empathic, we need to start today because they will change the world.
Hello everybody, thanks for joining us. All the spectators in Germany and maybe worldwide. Willkommen, liebe Zuschauer, Zuhörer, zu unserer Diskussion über das Empathy Museum's Project A Mile in My Shoes, hosted by Sommerblut Festival Cologne for the first time in Germany, Cologne, für das erste Mal in Deutschland, in Köln, deutsche Erstaufführung. I think in Corona times, to talk about empathy might be a very important subject because it takes maybe a whole new meaning in times of social distancing. Vielleicht kann Empathie, die Rolle und die Kraft der Empathie etwas Besonderes bewirken in Zeiten von Corona. But before we start the public discussion with Mary Gordon and Clare Patey, I would try to clarify some technical details because the discussion will be taken in English, and if you need or would like to have a translation, there is a possibility. You just have to call, I will say this in German, wenn Sie eine Übersetzung brauchen, dann müssen Sie einfach nur jemanden anrufen, das ist Charles Ripley, der Ihnen die Übersetzung per Telefon gibt. Die Nummer steht auf der Sommerblut-Webseite, aber ich sage sie Ihnen auch noch gerne. Das ist 030 3001 95242 mit einer PIN, die lautet 597858457 Raute. Aber Sie finden diese Nummer auf jeden Fall auch noch auf der Webseite. So, I will switch to English for the second technical detail because we would like very much you to join our discussion, and you can ask questions via the YouTube streaming and just via the live chat, okay? So the project manager of Cologne, Germany, of A Mile in My Shoes, Fabia Mekos, she will collect the questions and we will come to them at the end of our discussions after 30 or 40 minutes, and we will discuss them all. It depends on how many questions they are. And at least I would like to introduce myself. I'm Dorothea Marcus. I'm based in Cologne. I'm a cultural journalist, I'm a theater critic, and I've also been an audio producer for some of the stories for A Mile in My Shoes, which are now at the website. I did 3 of these stories, and it was a very meaningful project for me doing these interviews and producing them. And normally the whole project would have been in the center of Cologne at the Ebertplatz. It's a very difficult place in terms of drug traffic, but it's also a very interesting place in terms of common space, because there are so many artists and people trying to create a new kind of space there. But we were looking forward to next year, because next year we will see this project, A Mile in My Shoes, on Ebertplatz. And so long we will discuss about empathy, its powers and dimensions. And I'm so glad to have here Clare Patey, the artist, the director of Empathy Museum. Clare, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much to Sommerblut for inviting me to do this chat. I'm an artist from London and a curator. I'm the director part-time of the Empathy Museum, and I also run an urban farming project called Edible Utopia. And I suppose what characterizes my work is that it's very participatory. It involves people and visitors at the heart of whatever the experience is. It happens outside of traditional gallery or theatre spaces. It can be on the street, in a garden, on a bridge, in an old warehouse, and it involves collaboration with people from all sorts of different disciplines, from a surgeon to a lumberjack to a forager to an anthropologist.
Great. And so we have Clare from London, and so there are so many negative and frightening aspects about Corona-Krise, but at least it allows us to be with Mary Gordon from Toronto at the same time with Clare and me from Cologne. So Mary, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Dorothea. I'm very happy to be here and to celebrate all the wonderful work of the Empathy Museum and to be in conversation with you there in Cologne. I'm the founder and president of the Roots of Empathy organization, and that's an organization that builds empathy with school children, but also has the mission to build empathy in the world. Our school program is actually in Germany, and we're also on 3 continents. We've been doing this for 24 years. And the idea is to develop empathy by being coached to observe a tiny baby. And you shared the video there earlier, so I won't go into that further. But I'm a social entrepreneur. I am a former teacher. I think once a teacher, always a teacher, you're a lifer. But I'm also a lifer learner. And I really appreciate opportunities to learn in community. I'm very happy that there will be people who will call in with questions, and love this kind of format. I've never met Clare before, but know of her and certainly support wholeheartedly the work of Empathy Museum and this festival. So I guess I'm called a child advocate and a parenting expert, but really I'm a parent, a grandparent, a sister, a daughter. I'm a woman, I'm a person, and I'm really happy to be here.
And you are also an author, a very influencing person, and so we will hear lots about your project too. So first of all, Claire, would you tell us, Empathy Museum, what's Empathy Museum? Is it an institution? It's an itinerant art installation? Is it a theater project? Is it a permanent exhibition in a white cube gallery? What is it exactly?
Well, it is a traveling museum, a museum without walls. We travel all around the place, and basically we create projects that give people the opportunity to practice the art of empathy. So through creating new spaces, new social spaces, each one is built around the form of a shop. So we're responding to the decline in the British High Street and lots of shops closing, but also decreasing levels of empathy. And we're trying to create spaces where people can come together and through storytelling, through conversation, through empathic listening, can reflect and have conversations that, much like riding a bike, it's a skill that you can learn, allow people to have those experiences, embodied experiences of practicing the art of empathy. Yeah.
And so where did this idea come from initially, and what was the evolution of the project? Since when is it, and how many people have been reached by that?
In 2015, I was approached by a writer and philosopher called Roman Krishnarik, who wrote a book called Empathy, Why It Matters and How to Get It. And I've done a lot of work in my past around, it's a great book. And I've done a lot of projects in the past that were around, well, my main areas of work are around food, bringing people together around the social act of eating and growing food together, and around kind of alternative museums. And he said he had this idea, he wanted to make an empathy museum, and he asked me to come up with some thinking around some of the themes and the material that he looks at in his book, to translate that into experiences that people could have together as a kind of experiential museum. I guess that was the idea behind it. And so I started reading his book and talking to people about empathy. And I found that most people were describing empathy as either seeing the world through somebody else's eyes or walking in their shoes. And so I thought, what if we take that literally and we invite people to literally come in to a shoe shop and, like you saw in the film, walk a mile in someone else's shoes while they're listening to their story. And then from there, it kind of grew to this idea of having this model of these shops, so that people eventually could come to a high street. Instead of coming for a consumer experience, they could come for a human interaction and empathic experience. And that might be a really nice thing to try and do on local high streets where shops are closing, those spaces that traditionally are there not just to sell something. Those are spaces where people are interacting and communing with one another, and that we could create that. So we've created a shoe shop, Mile in My Shoes. We've created a crowdsourced library where people have donated their favorite book, and that we've covered the book, so you can't judge the book by its cover. You can only judge it by what someone has said about why they've given that book. And then you can take that book out and you can hand it on, and the journeys of these books go out into the world. And there's something around empathy and armchair travel into other worlds through literature and reading. And we're working on hairdressers at the moment, and we've got plans for a funeral parlour and a travel agents in the future. And before coronavirus, we were actually planning to open a more permanent shop space here in London. So that's where we are with it at the moment. And during lockdown, we're also beginning to collect some stories from people who are self-isolating and people who are working on frontline in health and social care situations, and to work with young people who are at home, not at school, to learn about podcasting and storytelling through that process. So that's the kind of basic We don't have a space, so we tour inside shipping containers that we convert to look like something else. So inside a giant shoebox for the shoe shop, inside a giant bookshelf of books for the library project. And that's really a solution to having security, weatherproofing, and traveling. So that's that.
This will come back, hopefully. But interesting is how we saw a little bit in the film, but how do people react after having been in these shoes, after walking around with them? Because some of the stories are quite really, they are so strong and emotional.
Yeah, and I think what it's difficult to describe it in words because it's almost something that you have to do. But I think what makes it powerful is the combination of the fact that you're walking and you're taking a physical journey on your own, a physical and empathic journey on your own. There's an intimacy about someone just speaking to you and telling you their story, and you then look down and you're embodying someone else's shoes, so it's almost like your feet aren't your own. So there's that part of it that I think makes it quite powerful, but it's also quite playful and quite theatrical. There's something about sort of dressing up around it. And there's also something, if you see someone in a giant pair of waders or going out in a pair of roller skates with headphones on, you stop and you look at them too. So it's got that sort of element. I'd say the reactions are different because obviously we all bring our own story to the story that we're listening to, so that I might connect with the story in a different way than you. But I would say that everybody does find those points of connection, and that there is that kind of shared humanity. I think that people come back and they felt that, and it might have challenged their prejudices or their values, or it might have moved them. But mainly, I would say the main thing is that people want to talk. And they want to talk either about the story that they've just heard, or they want to talk about empathy, or they want to talk about some of the issues that it's brought up for them, or they want to share their own story. And I'd say that was definitely a huge part of the project. Is you've got the storytellers at the very beginning, then you've got the walking and the visitors who are coming, and then you've got the conversations that happen in that shoebox after the experience has happened.
I just wanted to add for the audience, maybe, because they can catch a glimpse of it, just a glimpse, of course, because 5 of these stories are released at the Sommerblut homepage, and you can see these beautiful shoes there. So you can listen to them, and maybe you can have a small idea of what it would be like to go on. Maybe you can get around in hearing the stories, but I really advise you to get there, because these are already powerful stories for the first time in German there. But I would like to know, Claire, what has a good storyteller? What is a good storyteller for you? Has to be somebody who has had a very big experience of something, or it's just a normal person, or what? Well,
I think it's about the diversity. First of all, it's about the diversity of voices that are in there for me, and that often it's based around a geographical area. So we will go to a town and we will try and collect a bunch of stories that are reflective of the community that we find ourselves in. But I don't think that there's something that makes a particularly a great story. And I definitely don't think it's about someone who's had to, they're not all stories of somebody who's gone through something huge. And actually, if it's really, really huge, it's more difficult, I think, for people to make connections with it. And sometimes it can be unusual, so that, let's say we did a themed version around migration, for instance, but we didn't want to look at stories of people's journeys from where they've come from. I think it can be very triggering for people, and we also wanted to look at people's identity in a more holistic way. So you might find those stories surprising, because they might be about someone being a dad or a football fan or falling in love. And so the stories are very varied. a lot, and some of them do have a kind of transformational arc, and some of them are traumatic in some sorts of ways, but there's an awful lot that aren't. They're very, very, very varied. So that if you come to the museum with a friend, your experience might be completely different from their experience because you've connected with a different storyteller. I suppose the only thing that I'd say does, I think, make a good story is some kind of authenticity, attention to detail. If you can really set the scene of something, that's absolutely great. But I think they can be very, very different from one another and still be kind of successful storytelling, pieces of storytelling.
Okay. And so the project has traveled to many countries and to many continents. I've even heard of Siberia. I don't know if it's true, but at least it was in Belgium, in Australia, in US, in, well, Ireland, Brazil. How have reactions differed in different countries or maybe continents? Are there differences, or are the people always react the same?
I was thinking about this, and I think actually what's really extraordinary is that it isn't so different. And I think there is these like moments of connection and storytelling and listening seem to me to, I might be wrong, but seem to me to transcend sort of cultural difference. And I guess that's a testament to the idea that there's more that we share than divides us, and a kind of this shared common humanity, I guess.
Yeah, beautiful idea. Yeah. Anya, your assistant, once we talked with her, she told us also that there in Brazil there were huge reactions of there were so many people crying. Did I got that wrong, or was it?
It was very, very popular. I think the concept of empathy,
yeah.
I don't know whether Mary has found that too, but the concept of empathy is very, very popular in Brazil. And I think Roman's book has sold very, very well in Brazil, and the Empathy Museum was very popular. People were queuing for hours to come to it. And I don't know what that says about Brazilian culture, but there's a thirst for empathy. And I think that there's quite often in also communities that can be quite divided, there's that thirst for empathy. And but I wouldn't say people can be emotional anywhere, I think, and be affected anywhere, but it certainly was popular.
Very interesting. So, because one would never think about Brazil, especially because of their, of the political situation which we find there actually. But well, we will come to the political aspects maybe of empathy a little bit later on. And now let's get to Mary Gordon, to Toronto. I'm so glad you are here. So Roman Knarich describes empathy as the imaginative act of stepping into the shoes of another person and viewing the world from their perspective. So what is empathy exactly? Is it a psychological concept? Is it a gift, or is it a skill, or it's a genetic disposition of everybody?
Well, I think it's fair to say that everybody has their own take on what empathy is. And I'm happy to share the Roots of Empathy take. I agree with Roman that imagination is central to empathy, because you have to have imaginative capacities to imagine how another person might feel. And that is really cognitive empathy. And cognitive empathy is powerful. It allows us to understand the perspective of another person. And the first stage of any conflict resolution is the capacity to understand the perspective of the other person. So it's central. But in Roots of Empathy, we also pay equal attention to affective empathy. And affective empathy is our emotions. So that in the Roots of Empathy concept, we believe that these two things come together and help the person to be very deeply and emotionally as well empathic. So that the work we do absolutely trains perspective taking, but it also trains children in recognizing emotions and learning the names of them. So I believe that empathy is a pre-existing disposition in every single human being, but that it either blooms or fades, depending on what happens in that first year of life, whether the child is feels felt, whether the child learns to love or learns to hate. And it's interesting because it's 24 years that we've had Roots of Empathy, and then probably another 12 before that I was speaking about empathy. And at that time, the scientists were nowhere near talking about a relationship between the infancy period and the development of empathy, or the relationship to empathy and aggression and violence. So in saying brazenly and out loud that I believe, without any scientific evidence, that I believe that the common denominator in the violence and cruelty and genocides and all kinds of inhumane acts is the absence of empathy. But don't worry, you can cultivate empathy. If you've missed it, you can do it much in the same way that Claire was speaking about experiential learning, that you can develop empathy, can't teach it, but you can catch it by being exposed to empathy. So I see empathy really as being an attribute. Some people speak of it as a muscle that you develop. I don't really feel it's that way, but I do believe that empathy is a competency that can be developed, not taught, but caught.
There's a small question which comes to my mind in between, because, okay, I hope you will tell us more about your project bringing babies into the classrooms. It's very interesting, but could you imagine bringing babies to prisons, for example?
Oh, I have been asked to bring babies to prison long ago, 10 years ago in Northern Ireland. And in many places I've been asked to bring babies to prison. So it's, yes, it's the experiential learning, but there are other things that I think really impact the success of the Roots of Empathy program. And the success is that it has had multiple research studies completed in multiple languages on various continents, so that what is shown in the research everywhere is that levels of aggression and violence and bullying come down. But the interesting thing is, in the randomized longitudinal studies, they stay down. They stay down as long as 3 years after the program. But what I'm more excited about is the idea that the pro-social skills of the children, the caring, the helping, the cooperating, the including, oh my goodness, including is so important now, that those things go up and they stay up. So in terms of science showing that Roots of Empathy is impactful, the conditions that make it impactful is that you have a classroom of children who are there with one primary teacher. They are together as a group for at least 5 hours, 5 days a week. That is a family. That is a sort of a symbiotic organization. So
actually, because the schools are still closed.
we're missing that a lot now.
Yes.
I tell you, suddenly, any parents who were saying, oh, that teacher isn't so good to my child, they're now saying, oh, I get it, it was my child.
Absolutely.
But the idea is your question about prisons. This is a very long answer to the question about prisons. We do not have the setup that would allow us to guarantee that you could build empathy. As we guarantee we build empathy in children, in prisons, people do not come together as a group consistently and over time. So, people have sent me the names of the programs they want me to have. It's in group homes, it's in prisons, it's wherever you see the failure of empathy. And really, I don't blame the individual. Nobody wakes up and decides to be a criminal. So no, it won't work. In fact, it doesn't. I wouldn't do it in high school. And we're most asked to do this in high school because that's where you have the proliferation of the violence and extreme bullying. The thing is, the way we structure learning in high school, we have destroyed the capacity for children to be together as a group. That's not a good thing. We know that children and youth thrive with relationships. So we don't allow for that so much in high school, and certainly in prison we don't. So that's the reason, Dorothea, that I don't offer Roots of Empathy in prison. And we have been given some very attractive incentives to do this, but we will only do it where we can promise it will work.
Okay, interesting. And so please, could you tell us more about where do you find the babies and how many children did already participate in the Roots of Empathy project, and how old are these children? In fact, when do you stop bringing them together with babies? All these aspects would be very interesting.
Well, I love your question. Thank you. More than 1 million children, I don't know the exact number, but more than 1 million children have participated in Roots of Empathy on 3 continents. We have had children starting from 96 who had Roots of Empathy, who are now parents, who are now have been Roots of Empathy parents. So we started this program in Toronto. It's grown to every single province in Canada and all these other countries. So we have an idea of the people who received the program very early. And I'm always interested in the so what, what difference did it make? You're now an adult, you're now a parent. And one of our goals is to help these little children who we offer the program to understand that a baby is a person with feelings, and that how we relate to a baby has everything to do with how a baby sees themselves. So it's not just the safety, physical safety, it's the emotional, it's every aspect of that baby's development. So we have heard from parents who are currently, over the last 5 or 6 years, have been Roots of Empathy parents who were graduates when they were young children. And it's interesting what they remember. Last year, I met this young dad who was a Roots of Empathy father himself. And he said he remembered learning when he was 9 that a crying baby is not a bad baby, but a baby with a problem. And the problem is our problem to try and solve. And he said he remembered learning that you can never shake a baby, no matter how frustrated you are, you can never shake a baby. And he said he remembered learning you have to put a baby to sleep on its back, it's safer.
Oh, that's very nice.
So lots of things like that. So I think generationally, we believe that we are changing the world child by child, because children who experience Roots of Empathy go home to a family, go home to a community, go home to a neighborhood. And not only are they bringing their empathic selves to that community, they're bringing information about our shared humanity. They're bringing information about the rights of a baby. So there are many things, we say Roots of Empathy is a participatory democracy. Children learn how to vote in Roots of Empathy. They understand that their opinion counts. In fact, we use a Socratic method where we only ask the children questions. We only ask questions for which we don't know the answer to, because that would be manipulative otherwise. And we come from
a question, please. What would be a question like that?
Well, one of the questions, which is a lot of fun, is we ask the children, what do you think is the best way to diaper a baby? With disposable diapers or cloth diapers? Because that's a very real thing. Everybody can participate. And we ask the children to work in groups of 5 to discuss the merits. We give them all a cloth diaper and a disposable diaper. So they are asked to consider their answer based on the cost of the diapers, the 2 diapers, the convenience to the parent, the cost to the environment, and the comfort to the baby. So we say the 4 C's. So you are teaching children to think with multiple perspectives, yet you are asking them to come to consensus. So the 5 children have to have one answer. And that means you have to listen to and consider the opinion of the other. And you're under no pressure because no one's going to give you a grade on this. So it's not about how smart you are and how much bully you can put your opinion. It's a really great experience in building consensus and collaborating and showing that you can be affected by what you've learned from somebody else. You have a lot of laughter during this thing. So we always say to the classroom teacher when we're introducing this exercise, this could take a little bit of time. So it's up to you. You see, the classroom teacher does not deliver this program. It's an instructor from the community or someone from the school who is trained to teach the program. And with record time that children spent discussing this was 1 hour and 10 minutes. It's supposed to be 15 minutes, was 1 hour and 10 minutes because they took it so seriously. Now, very quickly, the answer to where do you find these babies? When we started in Germany, I have to say, we appreciate there's a very high level of privacy with parents in Germany for very good reasons.
It was in Bremen you started, I think, Bremen, yes. North of Germany, yeah?
Yeah, Bremen. So in Switzerland and in Germany, we have had the highest levels of privacy anywhere. And we always respect the culture of wherever we go. So people said, oh my goodness, you're going to have such a hard time finding babies. Yeah. We did not have a hard time finding babies because it's usually mothers, sometimes fathers, sometimes both, sometimes 2 mothers. You know, it depends the family situation. But we found that the parents were very gracious and generous in sharing the love of their babies when they understood that the parent-baby relationship is the world's most glorious example of empathy. And that just by coming and loving your baby, we will ask children to observe and that your baby is called a tiny teacher. The baby wears a t-shirt saying teacher. So we had no problem. And, you know, we really wanted to have a parent from the community so that the school children would see that mother and baby or that father and baby in the community. And then they mob them. Our baby, our baby. So they become heroes, rock stars in the community. So it really is not hard to find the parents. I just think that everywhere, parents, when they have a new baby, it's kind of like the springtime of humanity. It's like the biggest miracle you just want to share. Yeah. And, you know, you'd think maybe germs would be a problem. Well, I'm sure they are a problem, but the children wash their hands. And but the parents have been magnificent, I have to say, in Bremen, and we'd love to have parents all over Germany.
So Mary, I have to interrupt you because the time is really running. So, and Fabia passed over some questions already, but I still wanted to ask you I put 2 questions in one, because I'm wondering, I have a 10-year-old son, but he finds babies quite cute, but after a few minutes, he finds them quite boring because you can't really play football or something with them. Is this a gender issue with girls around the babies and the boys going elsewhere? And of course, something about class. Does it work out with kids which are really coming from poor families with problems in their families? Does it really work out like that?
Well, your 10-year-old son is quite normal. And we socialize our little boys, not necessarily to be cooing over babies. I can tell you in terms of neuroscience, boys and girls have equal capacity for empathy. It's how we socialize them, and then there are individual differences for sure. But in all Roots of Empathy classes all over the world, I can tell you that 4 months into the program, the boys are jockeying for position to be close to the baby. The boys, absolutely, their hearts melt. You wouldn't know the difference when children give their wishes for the baby at the end of the year. What do you wish for your baby? When your baby is your age, you have the most tender-hearted, generous, empathic responses. No difference between the boys and the girls. The girls might have a head start. All of our research shows that boys develop big time affective empathy, which they might not have had before. So they end up pretty even. The girls might have a head start, but the boys make greater gains. So it's not really a gender thing, and it's precious. And you know, teachers who host Roots of Empathy, we hear this all over the world. If they have a daughter at home, they say, oh, I just hope our daughter marries a little boy who has had Roots of Empathy. So I think the gender thing is a confusion and a noise that isn't valid.
I'm sorry, Mary, could you maybe answer the second questions? Because there's a huge amount of questions coming from the audience. So the second, for the rich.
Remind me of what the second question was.
It was just, maybe you can put it very shortly about children having huge problems in their families, which come from poor families.
Yes, sure. Well, I can tell you that it's not even, it's sure, it's the press of poverty complicates everything else, but the families who have adversity, there is a very big impact on the children for sure. And is it cruel to show children a loving relationship when they go home and they don't see it? And I'll quickly share with you, Dorothea, probably one of the most dramatic examples, and I've written about it in my book. It's a story of a young boy whose mother was murdered through domestic violence when he was 4. So he was put into foster care circumstances. And because his behavior was difficult, given the trauma he'd experienced, he kept getting kicked out. So he went to many, many foster homes. So he finds himself in a Roots of Empathy class. And at this point, he's 13 and he's failed several years because that happens when you keep changing schools. So he's trying to look really like he doesn't care, very macho. He shaved his head, and this is in the late 90s. This is a long time ago. Shaved his head, and he has a ponytail at the top and a tattoo at the back of his skull. That didn't happen in those days. Anyhow, during one of the Roots of Empathy classes, the mother said to the students, I wanted a very cuddly baby, but what did I get? Miss Independence, who won't sit in the snuggly and cuddle into me. She wants to look out at the world. So then the bell rang, and the mother said to the children, would anybody like to try on my snuggly, the carrier? And our friend put up his hand. So the mother was surprised, and all the kids were surprised, but they were busy putting on their backpack and they were leaving for lunch. So the Roots of Empathy instructor said to this young boy, would you like to put the baby in the carrier? And the boy said yes. Now the mother looked mildly horrified. So he put that, having heard what she said, he put that baby in the carrier, chest to chest. And that baby molded to him. Our babies are brilliant. He went over to the corner of the classroom where there wasn't anyone there, and he started rocking in that seasick rock that he had seen the mom. And after a few minutes, he came back and he gently took the baby out. And now the mother hadn't broken glance, right? He took the baby out gently and he gave the baby back to the mother. And as he hands over the baby, he says to the Roots of Empathy instructor, do you think that if no one has ever loved you, that you could still be a good father?
Yeah, this is a heartbreaking story. It's a very strong story. Thank you for sharing this. We will, I think, because we have just 16 minutes left, so we will maybe come to the questions from the audience now. So there are some questions. One spectator asked, who does your empathy serve? I'm not sure if I got this right. Sag's mal auf Deutsch.
Wem bringt die Empathie was?
Yeah, who does empathy serve? Who is in profit of empathy? The person who gives or the person who receives empathy, maybe? It's a question to Claire. Does it make a difference for the person who's telling the story? There's the next question. Sind das verschiedene Fragen? Are these different questions? Okay, so I'm reading, I'm sorry. It's just one question, but it's long. I repeat. Who does empathy serve? Does it make a difference for the person who is telling the story? Is it a personal or individual reflection that you are glad to be better off than them? It's a little bit provocative, especially compared to compassion, which includes action. What is the difference between looking at human connection through the lens of privilege? I think it makes the point of what we talked about last time of compassion industry, which isn't a privileged look of compassion into somebody who's might be less privileged.
Is sorry, is that all one great big question about the storytelling?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I would say that we have quite a particular way of engaging with storytellers, and that's all very carefully handled, and there's a lot of ethics around that I haven't got time to go into the whole thing. But the testimonies from storytellers generally say, I'd say almost 100% say that for them it was a very empowering or cathartic experience to share their story, and nobody is invited to share their story and has to do it. I mean, people, we ask people and they can say no or yes, and I think people have found it quite an extraordinary experience as well, especially we've had a lot of people who've then come to the box, walked in someone's shoes and written them a letter, and we compile all these letters that have been written to the storytellers, and it begins to be a kind of two-way process in that way. Was the question that is this like a lot of privileged people coming to walk in the shoes of people who are less privileged than them?
Yeah, I think there was some, yeah, I think so.
I don't think that's the case, and I think we're quite careful to have an entire range of different people who are giving their stories, and I think that the empathy can work both ways around. Actually, it's not a one-way street, and I think the point of it is to perhaps come across people who do something or have experiences that you haven't had in your own life, but you might find that you're connected with someone who has had exactly the same experience as you, and that can also be really kind of affirming, and feelings of empathy can come from that connection because that connection's so close to you. It's really not intended to be a whole load of stories about traumatic, awful things that have happened to people, and then a whole bunch of privileged people coming and going, oh, how sad. That's going to be my experience of that, and then I'm going to go home to my nice house in the countryside or whatever. It's not intended to be that at all. And I think that in the experience, and then in the conversations and the feedback and the processes that happen afterwards, I wouldn't say that is in any way predominantly the experience of either the storyteller or the listener.
Maybe, Dorothea, I'd like to say something in support of what you're saying, Claire. I did experience this. It is not voyeuristic. It is connectivity. It is person to person, heart to heart. It's not coming from a higher position and making judgments. So it was actually heartbreakingly beautiful. And people never laughed at people's circumstances. They were in awe of the harsh reality of some of the stories. And authenticity is a word you used, Claire, and that absolutely captures, I think, as a participant in it, there was no element of privilege or voyeurism. It was a real experience.
And can I just say one other thing as well? We don't charge anyone to come into the space, and we pop up in unexpected places because we're in a shipping container, and we can be in the shopping centre in your main street, or we could be in a field, like, you know, outside your village or whatever. And people don't know often what it is. And it looks like a giant shoebox, and it's intriguing. And people come in and they go, "What is this?" And it's not kind of a space like an opera house where people are paying a lot of money and coming. Not that I've got anything against that, but it isn't like that. So it's quite a kind of leveler before you even start in terms of the accessibility of it.
Okay, I have another question. Thank you for answering this. The question is, do you think people are more empathic during the COVID crisis? Can such initiatives as mutual aid groups or appreciation for usually overlooked jobs can be taken forward to the post-corona world?
Oh, I love that question, because I think the proliferation of empathy in this post-COVID or current COVID situation is massive. And I think the idea that people are suddenly seeing the realities of other people in an empathic way. You know, our doors have been closed and locked down, but our hearts and our minds have been unlocked to be able to connect to others in ways that really we couldn't before. We didn't have the opportunity. So I think this is an absolute opportunity to have empathy flourish.
Well, but on the same time, sorry, just one small remark. On the same time, COVID crisis is underlining the class difference, because in the US, the poorer people are more likely to die.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's true. The poorer people are more likely to die, and that's because of overcrowding and living conditions and lack of, depending on what country you're in, lack of free medical support. But I do see that when this is over, we could have a more egalitarian society because we are suddenly aware of all of these differences.
And I think that the stories of support and of mutual aid and of acts of kindness and of neighbourliness is a great counter narrative to the kind of neoliberal narrative that we're selfish, self-interested, we're interested in competition. And actually the kind of surveys that have been done in this country around whether people would prefer to bring the economy back or to look after people's health, that's just been like up there, the idea that that's the most important thing. And I've got a huge amount of optimism about all of those stories and that way of thinking about the world, and empathy playing a major part in that. And the leaders who've been most successful are pretty empathic leaders in tackling the crisis, mainly women, I would say.
Yeah, yes, they are. But, oh, well, Mary,
it's gone.
it's gone. But there's a huge question popping up in me, because so in Germany, actually, because you're at another stadium of the crisis, as we are here in Germany. In Germany now, there are popping up so many conspiracy theories about Bill Gates did invent the coronavirus to sell more of his medicaments or to make more money, and all these stupid sort of things. There are even massive assemblies of people, demonstrations on all these things. And my question is, isn't it that dangerous for empathy to disappear while people are not really seeing or feeling each other, because we are seeing each other via the screen, but not really in social events.
I think it's so interesting that there is this angst or longing for human connection, for human touch.
Yeah.
That we've been able to, I mean, technology is brilliant. Look, you're doing this is gorgeous, but it doesn't meet our human needs to connect in a real sense to one another. And I think there will be an explosion of hugging and handshaking and all of these things when we get back together, because it's a basic need to connect. Little babies will die for lack of touch. Elderly people do much better physically when they have touch. So it's the same throughout the lifespan, that to be human is to connect to others. And touch is part of that. And we do know that silly things, like in a restaurant, if the server touches you on the shoulder on the way or says, "How are you?" guaranteed you get a better tip. That's researched. So we know that part of our humanity is our longing to connect to others, not just their ideas, but to have a physical sort of ambience, which allows us to say, yes, I'm with you, I hear you. So I think we've overlooked that in our sophistication.
But I agree, I completely agree with you about touch. But I think another interesting thing about the virus is that, like, we're talking about it and we're all experiencing it. And I'm talking to people because we've had projects cancelled in different parts of the world, and we're all sharing some sort of common experience, which is really unusual, like a global common experience. And it kind of lays bare the interconnectedness, the interdependence of everything. This virus knows no borders. It knows it's invisible, and it knows it doesn't matter who you are or where you live. And there's something about...
I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Go on.
It's a great leveler, I agree with you. And I think the interesting thing is, in Europe and North America, we're fairly independent societies. But what this has done is created an interdependence. And an interdependence is a healthier way to go ahead. And it means that what happens to you matters to me. Yeah. And you care about what happens to me. And because you can't buy your way out of this pandemic, that if your prime minister, or, in our case, your prime minister's wife can get the virus, it targets us all equally. So I think it doesn't, I take that back, it doesn't target us all equally. The poor have more of it, but you can't buy your way out of it.
Okay. There's one last question of the audience, and I'm seeing we are really, unfortunately, running out of time. It has been very short. I really regret this, because we have to close at time, more or less. So I just putting the last question into our discussion, and it's a more political one. Do you think individual levels of empathy are linked to political views and their approach to issues such as welfare systems, equal pay, or racism? Do you know? Do you got the question? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry. It's a more political one.
Well, I'm happy to jump in. I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole to say that.
That's why I'm suggesting you answer it.
Thank you very much, Claire. I would never say, this is your show, so I'll take the difficult question. I would never say that empathy is related to political parties. But I can say that there are groups in society which value connection and value the idea of inclusion and diversity more so than other groups, and maybe you could define them by political parties. I don't think you will get anyone in the common sense universe to answer that question.
Yeah, Would you like to add something, Claire?
No, other than I agree with Mary, and I think there's definitely narratives, but the political narratives that are out there that values some of the things that I was talking about before to do with self-interest or competition that seem to me to be in direct opposition to high levels of empathy.
You know, the one thing I will add to it, there's in-group empathy, so that if you are of a particular religion, it's natural that you would have a better, deeper empathy for people who have shared values. Now that could translate to the political scene as well, but the move is for everybody to have out-group empathy, that we would be able to have this, afford the same human understanding to a stranger. And there's the answer to the climate change. And there is the answer to all of the huge issues society has, because unless we have empathy for the children not yet born, unless we have empathy for the people on the other side of the ocean or across the mountain, unless we can relate to the human longing of people who don't speak our language, all of those things require empathy. So to solve the intractable social problems of the world, we need empathy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary and Claire, for this discussion. It could have been so much longer. Maybe we will repeat this next year when the real project of A Mile in My Shoes will take place on Ebertplatz, right in the center of Cologne. Thank you for being there. Thanks for putting questions into our discussions. And I really advise you to go on the web page of Sommerblut to listen to the stories with the shoes and to catch a glimpse of what it means to be in another's shoes. And I'm sure we will see us again next year. Thanks for being here. Greetings to Toronto and London.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.
Oh, we got it. It was very short. Oh, thank you. That was so short, but I think it was a circle.
Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you for the signing, Kathleen.
Thanks for being there. You were so good, so vivid, so